Hello, my name is Christopher Lemma. Our society has been passionately debating the value of the death penalty in homes, schools, courtrooms, and halls of Congress. Some believe that the death penalty is just and should be practiced, while others believe that it is unjust and should be abolished. Many individuals feel that the terms capital punishment and the death penalty are not the same, and that there are differences between them. So, what is the death penalty? Technically, the death penalty is the actual act of killing the individual through one of the numerous methods of executing it. Capital punishment refers to the entire process of trying the accused and then awarding death sentences to him by a judicial court of law. This idea of punishment is what has stemmed the idea of the death penalty, where individuals who commit crimes that are so bad need to be given the ultimate penalty. This penalty is death. To follow this, we must ask ourselves why the United States allows the death penalty. The answer lies in the limited power of the U.S. federal government to impose laws on the states, the interplay between state politics and federal law, and the role of the U.S. Supreme Court in interpreting the Constitution. One result of America's emphasis on federalism and local autonomy is that the United States is not one single place when it comes to the death penalty. The law and practice of capital punishment vary from state to state and region to region. Each state is allowed to carry out the death penalty because of the way in which the Fifth and Eighth Amendments were created. The Fifth Amendment states that no one person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, while the Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Due to the fact that the Fifth and Eighth Amendments were passed at the same time, it seems that the Constitution allows for the death penalty. There are 31 states that allow the death penalty. These states include Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Virginia, Washington, and Wyoming. On the other hand, there are 19 states, including the District of Columbia, that ban the death penalty. These include Alaska, Connecticut, Hawaii, Illinois, Iowa, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nebraska, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Dakota, Rhode Island, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. The United States federal government applies the death penalty for crimes that include treason, terrorism, espionage, federal murder, large-scale drug trafficking, and attempting to kill a witness, juror, or court officer. Once accused, there have been 5 different methods of executing the death penalty in the history of the United States, which include lethal injection, electrocution, gas firing squad, and hanging. There are different trends in public opinion regarding the death penalty in the United States, especially amongst men and women, blacks and whites, and young and old people. Opinion on the death penalty by gender is really interesting, as 74% of men and 62% of women support the death penalty. One argument is that men commit more murders and death penalty-worthy crimes than women. The number backs this theory, with men at fault for 90% of the 15,094 murders committed in 2010. Therefore, knowing the consequences, men would certainly accept the death penalty if they are committing more murders than women. The death penalty support by race is also interesting, with 71% of whites and 44% of blacks supporting the death penalty. Statistics show that blacks are more likely to receive the death penalty than whites. Also, the death penalty is more likely to be given to an individual if they were to kill a white person. Race has a massive impact on the death penalty, and it is a great problem for the U.S. government because this could be a violation of our Constitution. Equality of rights is of massive importance, especially to our Constitution. Lastly, young people are more likely to oppose the death penalty. Trends suggest that young people ages 18 to 29 are more likely than middle-aged and older adults to oppose the death penalty. For some students, the opposition to capital punishment comes down to money. Long-term incarceration for death row inmates demands excessive state funding that could be better served in areas like education or crime prevention in at-risk communities. It can cost taxpayers $1 million to incarcerate an individual for life, and $3 million per death row inmate for incarceration, trials, and execution. Through all of the debate of the death penalty, there have been numerous controversial cases. Here I will present some of the most controversial cases that have occurred. Napoleon Beasley, a football player and president of his high school class, was sentenced to death for shooting a 63-year-old man in the head during a carjacking. Beasley was 17 when he committed the crime. He had no prior criminal record, and he was too young to vote, too young to drink, and too young to serve in the military. His capital murder trial began in January 1995, and in May 2002, having exhausted every possible appeal, Beasley was executed. He was 25 years old. Due to this case, in 2005, the Supreme Court ruled that the execution of juveniles is unconstitutional. Another case was that of Troy Davis, who was convicted for the murder of an off-duty Georgia police officer named Mark McPhail in 1989. Davis spent more than 2 decades on death row, maintaining his innocence the entire time. Prosecutors found no murder weapon. The case against him included no physical evidence and consisted entirely off of witness testimonies which contained inconsistencies even at the time of the trial. All but 2 of the state's non-police witnesses from the trial contradicted their testimony. Pope Benedict XVI, Amnesty International, President Jimmy Carter, and nearly 1 million other Davis supporters signed a petition to the Georgia Board of Pardons for clemency. Davis was executed by lethal injection on September 21, 2011. The Innocence Project, founded in 1992 by Peter Neufeld and Barry Scheck at Cardozo School of Law, exonerates the wrongly convicted through DNA testing and reforms the criminal justice system to prevent future injustice. This project does a superb job at honoring those individuals who have been wrongly accused, like the ones that I have stated in the previous cases. Hopefully, the innocent individuals that have been accused are recognized before they make it on the Innocence Project website. The death penalty in the United States has changed drastically over time. The history of it can help us understand why these changes came to be and how they changed. In 1622, the first legal execution of a criminal in the American colonies occurred in Virginia with the execution of Daniel Frank for theft. 1682 marked the first change as Pennsylvania limited crimes punishable by death to treason and murder. 1787 was the year of political support as the Founding Fathers allowed for the death penalty when writing the Constitution. But in 1791, the Bill of Rights was ratified, including the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits the imposition of cruel and unusual punishments. Nevertheless, the practice of capital punishment is universally accepted, and it is understood at the time that the Eighth Amendment was not intended to stop it. Michigan, in 1846, made the first big leap towards the ratification of the death penalty. It was the first state to abolish the death penalty except for treason. And then in 1852, Rhode Island became the first state to outlaw the death penalty for all crimes, including treason. On June 29, 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled the death penalty unconstitutional and overturned over 600 death sentences. But shortly after, on July 2, 1976, the U.S. Supreme Court reaffirmed constitutionality of the death penalty. December 7, 1982 marked the first lethal injection that was performed in Texas. Following that, we let go of 3 methods of execution: hanging, gas chamber, and firing squad. Evidently, the U.S. has had a tremendous amount of history with capital punishment and the death penalty, and it is still practiced today in over 2/3 of the states. I have my own personal beliefs that goes against popular opinions about the death penalty. I myself oppose the death penalty because of various reasons that I will state going forward. First off, there is a better alternative to the death penalty. Life without parole is a better way of dealing with an individual's crimes because I believe that it is harsher to have an individual live a life that is unwanted with the memories and thoughts of the crime that they have committed. Also, it does not make sense to put an end to killing by killing an individual who has killed somebody. There have to be better ways of handling these types of crimes. Secondly, the death penalty puts innocent lives at risk. There are numerous innocent people that have been convicted of a crime wrongly and have been lucky enough to be released from death row. Imagine all of the individuals, like the ones I spoke about previously in the cases, who have lost their lives wrongly due to the death penalty. To execute an innocent person is morally reprehensible. This is a risk that we cannot take. Next, capital punishment does not erase crime. Scientific studies have consistently failed to demonstrate that the executions deter people from committing crimes. Around our country, states without death penalty have a lower murder rate than neighboring states with the death penalty. The most important conflict that arises for our government is the financial concept of the death penalty. We pay millions for the death penalty system. That is just money that can be spent for a better method of dealing with punishable crimes. Literally hundreds of millions of dollars have already been spent on the response to crime, which is calculated to be carried out on a few people each year and which has done nothing to stem the rise in violent crime. Death penalty cases are much more expensive than other criminal cases and cost more than imprisonment for life with no possibility of parole. The true cost of the death penalty includes all of the added expenses of the unsuccessful trials in which the death penalty is sought but not achieved. Moreover, if a defendant is convicted but not given the death sentence, the state will still incur the cost of life imprisonment, in addition to the increased trial expenses. The death penalty is not a good manner in dealing with terrible crimes, because of the financial deficit that our government faces with each case. Lastly, although our Constitution seems to support the death penalty, though the way in which the Fifth and Eighth Amendments were created, the death penalty is still subject to cruel and unusual punishment. Of all the punishments that exist, the death penalty would have to be the cruelest. Stripping an individual from their life is not a morally correct thing to do. Capital punishment is immoral in principle, and unfair and discriminatory in practice. Therefore, no one deserves to die as a punishment. Simply because the government is killing an individual doesn't mean that it is moral. If anything, it puts the government equal to the individual who made the terrible crime to begin with. There are ways of dealing with capital punishment. I believe that the government should take a different approach on the subject. Instead of dealing with crime that was committed, attempt to stop the crime from happening initially. Living 10 minutes away from Manhattan, it has come to my attention that there are a plethora of police officers walking around every street. This does not include the officers that are driving in an official car. The NYPD has over 3,000 police officers walking the streets of New York at all times of the day. This has led to an incredible decrease in crime within the city. Something like this, although a bit expensive to start off, is a perfect way to reduce crime in all parts of the country. The expenses for this idea will weigh out the expenses of the death penalty by a milestone, and it will not only decrease crime, but it will make people realize that the government is interested in the safety of all. This is a good message to send to the entire nation, as it will make this nation a safer and more enjoyable place to live in.